Pads Lake County, a nonprofit homeless service organization, is looking to purchase the Fairbridge Inn property at 3732 and 3740 Grand Avenue to convert it into an emergency shelter. Currently, emergency shelters are only allowed in 2 zoning districts within the village, which are the C3 Heavy Commercial District and P Public Lands District, subject to a special use permit approval. The subject site is zoned C2 EGG, which is Community Commercial East Grand Gateway Overlay District. At this time, the C2 zoning district and the EGG overlay district do not permit an emergency shelter by right or by way of special use permit. The EGG district is a special purpose district overlaying approximately 60 acres of C2 district, generally located on Grand Avenue between the city of Waukegan corporate limits to the east and the intersection of Illinois Route 41 to the west, including 1 block north and south of Grand Avenue. The Village Comprehensive Plan identifies the East Grand Corridor as a mixed-use gateway into Gurnee and encourages small and medium-scale retail, service, and mixed-use redevelopments that should promote pedestrian connectivity and be oriented toward the corridor. Generally speaking, suitable locations for emergency shelters are near arterials within walking distance of adequate public services and facilities or within commercial centers with convenient access to community resources such as public transportation, employment, places of worship, and other social services. The EGG overlay district benefits from these resources, including various job sites, adjacency to commercial, office, and industrial centers, and access to bus route 565, which runs through the overlay district and connects it to employment sites to the west and south of Gurnee, as well as the Metro train station in Waukegan. PADS is proposing a text amendment to Article 7 titled Special Purpose Districts to allow emergency shelters in the East Grand Gateway Overlay District as a special use. Following the text amendment request, PADS is requesting a special use permit to run an emergency shelter on the Fairbridge Inn site. PADS intends to retain the existing hotel building and rehabilitate it into a fixed shelter with 30 sleeping rooms. 2 to 3 residents will occupy each shelter room, depending on the room sizes and building code allowance. Each room will be equipped with sleeping areas, a private bathroom, microwave, and lighting. No cooking instruments or other than the microwave are allowed in the rooms. Security cameras will be installed around the building perimeter to provide complete site coverage. All doors will be equipped with a security system to restrict unauthorized entry into the building, except the main entrance, which will be staffed at all times. The exterior site improvements include new lighting on the building, minor modifications to the building entrance, restriping the parking lot, adding new landscaped islands, adding new bicycle spaces, installing a new trash enclosure, fencing the entire site, eliminating the access on Grand Avenue, which is subject to IDOT's approval, and replacing approximately 5,000 square feet of existing pavement south of the site with landscaped gardens. All shelter applicants must pass a screening process, which takes place at PADS current processing center 2 miles away from the subject site at 1800 Grand Avenue in Waukegan. The screening process confirms literal homelessness, county residency, sex offender status, and appropriateness for shelter. Stays will be limited to 90 days maximum unless extended based on progress in finding housing or employment. Residents will be required to participate in comprehensive shelter programming, including mental health, employment, and workforce development services, substance use, rehabilitation, and life skills. Residents must engage in programming to avoid losing their sheltering opportunity. The PZB is requested to determine if an emergency shelter is a proper use within the EGG overlay district and is consistent with the comprehensive plan goals and policies. The PZB must first make a recommendation on the requested text amendment, followed by a recommendation on the special use permit, and the village board will make the final determination. The applicant is in attendance to answer PZB's question, and just, you have a packet in front of you that will include an expert opinion by Okrent Keisel Associates regarding the use, and some letters in support and opposition that we received after we sent out the packets to you. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Vard, for the introductory overview of the project. Good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I'm David Meek, zoning attorney for PADS Lake County. Tonight, the PADS team will talk with you about how this shelter facility can positively affect a change in the lives of people experiencing homelessness in Gurnee and positively improve the conditions in and around this section of Grand Avenue. PADS can do this because it's taking ownership and control of the Fairbridge Inn, ending its use as a motel and implementing a new PADS program here for supportive housing for homeless individuals. This will be a fixed shelter for screened clients, not an overnight shelter serving people on a first-come, first-served basis. It will be a place for clients to live in semi-private rooms in an environment that provides dignity, security, and support for them day and night for a period of 90 days. The elimination of a blighted motel and the crime and vagrancy associated with it will also benefit the neighborhood. This facility is an investment in the East Grand area. It will be a turnaround project rather than contribute to the historical pattern of decline and disinvestment. Outside of this public hearing, you've already heard from many concerned residents and representatives of some local businesses. No doubt you'll hear from them again tonight. Many of them are expressing fears and concerns that come from their own lived experiences in the neighborhood, dealing with vagrancy, crime, and safety. They worry about their property values declining in this facility, if this facility is allowed, because they assume that PADS clients will only exacerbate the crime and the sense of insecurity from public drug use and vagrancy. Take one example. You're going to hear from the opposition that this building is going to attract and house criminals and drug addicts and people who are going to be dropped off unscreened in the middle of the night. In fact, no one can walk up to this building. PADS will have an intake and screening process at a separate facility. And to the extent there are persons who are brought to PADS in the middle of the night, this is a service provided in coordination with local police who are responding to this community's calls for police assistance with a homeless individual. PADS will hold such individuals in a secure area for a single night until other services can be provided for them elsewhere. So we submit that the new shelter will positively affect the perceived and actual conditions of the neighborhood. It will remove the opportunities for crime and vagrancy afforded by a budget motel. It will provide people who have been homeless in the neighborhood with a place to sleep, live, and spend their days. And it will provide wraparound supportive services to help them improve their lives. This is an investment in the future of this local community, its people, and its properties. This project renovates and reinvigorates a dilapidated structure and provides much-needed investment in an important commercial corridor where private investment has been lacking for decades. This is an opportunity for the greater good of Gurnee. Tonight, the PADS team will explain and elaborate on the project, and you'll hear from the following. First, Alan Swilley, the Executive Director of PADS Lake County. He will explain what PADS does as Lake County's sole provider of emergency shelter. He will explain the need for fixed shelter, this type of particular facility, and he will describe the programs and operations that will be happening at this location. Next, Larry Kearns, principal with Wheeler Kearns Architect, will go over the improvements to the building and the site. George Kisiel, president of Okrent Kisiel Associates, will evaluate the land use, zoning, and planning context and demonstrate how the requests for zoning text amendment and special use meet the standards of review. Next, April Reddick, president and CEO of DuPage PADS, Lauren Taylor, and Betty Bogg, CEO, Connections for the Homeless, and Lauren Taylor, a resident of Margarita Inn in Evanston. Betty and April work for organizations like PADS. They operate similar facilities in Evanston and Downers Grove, respectively. They will offer their perspectives on how this type of shelter facility operates and on the positive impacts on the surrounding neighborhoods. Can I have the next slide, please? That's our agenda. We have a thorough and compelling presentation to share with you. Director Swiley will lead us off. Thank you.
My name is Alan Swilly, and I am the Executive Director of PADS Lake County. I would like to thank this esteemed board for considering our proposal to address the homeless epidemic here in Lake County. Historically, poverty was concentrated in urban areas with dense populations. Urban centers have dealt with this challenge for decades, adjusting policies, developing housing initiatives, and creating transient-oriented design systems and cultivating healthy ecosystems of nonprofit organizations to support those in need. However, in the past 15 to 20 years, the phenomenon known as the suburbanization of poverty has significantly impacted suburbs across America. Poverty has grown at a rate faster in the suburbs than in the urban centers they surround. Suburban communities like Lake County were unprepared for this rapid growth. Unlike urban centers such as Chicago, Lake County did not have the luxury of decades of response to growing poverty and now lack the social infrastructure to meet these challenges. Specifically, in terms of homelessness, our only solution for the past 30 years has been providing 8 hours of shelter per day using pads on the floor inside church basements. This is no longer viable, nor should it be. Our shared Lake County must rely on more sophisticated problem solving, resilient assets, and better partnerships to address the homeless crisis. Currently, 30% or over 200,000 Lake County residents are living in poverty or on the brink of it. Food prices are the highest they've been in over 40 years. Housing is scarce, and when available, it's not affordable. This external volatility places our residents at extreme risk for insecurity, resulting in a 300% increase in homelessness since 2019. With emergency COVID-19 funds drying up in the coming months, there will be no designated places for our neighbors to go. If we are serious about solving our homeless challenge, we must shift our thought process from blaming those in need and the institutions trying to support them to developing healthy ecosystems, resilient long-term assets, and collaborative programming to create a social safety net. This net should ensure that our neighbors experiencing a housing crisis have access to basic resources like shelter, food, and employment to lift themselves out of their situation. It is important to note that PADS does not create homelessness. We support our communities in responding to it. However, it is challenging to do so without basic tools like fixed shelters. This necessary shift in mindset can be difficult for some, but until it occurs, our homeless challenge will continue to grow, and PADS will continue to serve quietly. The Fairbridge Inn is part of a vision for a small network of coordinated shelters throughout the county where they are needed most. This vision aligns with our shared values as a county while addressing a seriously critical need. I have listened to many in the area and learned that we share the same desire to solve homelessness. However, we don't share an understanding of the problem, which impedes our ability to work together to create shared solutions. The lack of shelter in our community negatively impacts all of us. From talking to residents and business owners and listening to the testimonies provided by many in this room, it is clear that we need to understand the benefit of a fixed shelter at the Fairbridge Inn, making it important to distinguish between sheltered residents and sheltered homelessness and unsheltered homelessness. Sheltered homelessness is the homelessness you don't see. It includes the 530 men and women and children living in hotels across the county. 47% of them who have income and wake up to go to work while in our program. Sheltered homeless individuals meet with case managers, they gain employment and housing, and can now tend to their medical needs effectively. Their basic needs are met, allowing them to activate dreams once buried under a pile of depression. The sheltered homeless are the fortunate ones, actually. Unsheltered homeless can be the opposite. Unsheltered homeless individuals exhaustively walk the streets, constantly being told to move along. They sleep in neighbors' backyards and occupy unattended lots, ravines, and business parking lots. They are more likely to be victims of crime and more likely to panhandle to meet their basic needs. Unsheltered homeless individuals place expensive pressure on healthcare systems, police, and businesses. The number of unsheltered individuals is growing rapidly, and residents of Waukegan, Gurnee, Zion, and North Chicago are feeling the effects of a broken shelter system. I share that same feeling. It is my hope that after hearing our case, you will vote to recommend our project to move forward, and more importantly, support our vision for real social infrastructure throughout the county. This is not only for the neighbors that are in need, but it's also for the community members that they press upon throughout the community. So let's get to it. First slide. Do I control the slides? Or? Oh, okay, sorry. My first time, y'all. So the challenge just articulated led PADS to develop a new operating vision. This vision incessantly works towards developing the social infrastructure that I just mentioned. We believe that if we can cultivate a vibrant ecosystem of resources and opportunity for our neighbors experiencing a housing crisis, then we can strengthen the community's social safety net so that homelessness is rare, brief, and non-recurring. For 30 years, PADS has been the leading agency for the homeless response system in Lake County and have been privileged to serve this community, very much so. PADS is also the organization of frontline workers who, along with our fellow faith partners, put our lives on the line to keep hundreds of neighbors safe during the pandemic. Additionally, we have a new leadership team with a combined 80 years of nonprofit experience and 45 years of housing and residential experience. My colleague, PADS Director of Finance and Operations, Eric Foote, is the president of the largest and only homeless response system in the county, while my colleague Nestor, PADS Director of Programs, is the committee chair for its Strategic Planning and Performance Committee. Our diverse education, experience, and influence now supports the community in developing real sustainable solutions, such as the one being presented to you guys today. Can we go to the next slide? Oh, thank you. So the need for shelter is staggering. The top graph shows that since 2019, the county has seen almost a 300% increase in homelessness and another 50% increase in just the last year. Families have seen a whopping 75% increase in homelessness, while children in our shelter system have seen a 310% increase. PADS currently has roughly 507 to 530 individuals in shelter, with more than 200 of our neighbors still sleeping outside. And this is Lake County. Next slide, please. The face of homelessness is changing. In 2023, 85%, and the year prior to that, 85% of the 1,087 neighbors experiencing homelessness was new to homelessness. This means that they were just individuals in front of you in the school line picking up their children. They were standing in the grocery aisle with you as they pondered what spaghetti sauce to choose. They have jobs, and they should not be forced to stay in their situation because our system values rugged individualism over compassion. As I stated in my opening remarks, many Gurnee residents voiced their frustration with the growing unsheltered population in their community. I could not agree more. Gurnee School District has seen its low-income population rise by 54% during the same period when overall homelessness rose by almost 300%. According to United Way 211, Gurnee residents rank 4th in the number of requests for basic needs such as shelter, housing, and food. Notably, 44% of these requests pertain specifically to housing and shelter. Additionally, a snapshot of PADS shelter residents taken in June of this year revealed that Gurnee residents comprise the 3rd largest group in our shelter. Our management of the shelter. So we believe that there's a lot to our management and our processes, but we wanted to highlight a few: security and operations. This slide lists some of the highlights in security and operations management for the 73 to 90 potential residents that will be in our shelter. Security. Our screening process ensures that we know who is in the building at any given time. This is far different from the for-profit hotel business structure who will rent to anyone that can pay. No longer can sex trafficking or other criminal activity occur on the premises. We screen for sex offender status, county residency, and appropriateness for shelter. And we use background checks to understand the full profile of the individual, of our neighbor. Conducting drug tests as a screening measure goes against the American Disabilities Act. Each resident signs a contract agreeing to shelter rules of safety and participation in programming, along with an array of security features like motion-centered lighting, cameras, and locked doors. PADS will embark on an innovative partnership with Gurnee Police Department to invite them to become members of the Lake County Coalition for the Homeless. This allows us to share information with Gurnee PD, who can help us screen for warrants, active warrants, prior to shelter entry. Our operations. Operations include 8.5 personnel in the daytime. This is more than the staffing at DuPage PADS' fixed shelter, where more than 300 residents are served, and they do an awesome job there. The staffing include an associate director of shelter, a supervisor of shelter operations, a dedicated door and camera monitor, 2 resident support staff, 3 case managers, a part-time nurse, and a part-time therapist. Quiet hours and curfew is at 10 p.m. Overnight staff include 2 resident support staff, 1 security staff, and an on-call supervisor. Next slide, please. Oh, thank you. Programs. So I think one of the greatest benefits to this shelter model specifically, is the ability to have wraparound, co-located programming that supports self-sufficiency and restores our residents to their full potential. It's critical. It's the difference between what has happened before for the last 30 years and what is happening now and what the future looks like. Programs include on-site employment services by the Job Center of Lake County, on-site substance abuse counseling offered by NACASA, on-site medical and mental health care, and life skills groups. Residents are required to participate in programming appropriate to their service plan as a condition of the stay. A normal day consists of breakfast provided by volunteers. Residents that are employed will wake up and go to work as they normally do. 47% of our residents have jobs. And those that are unemployed will meet with the job center personnel to work on employment. Others will meet with their case managers to access housing, while those that are medically fragile will be tended to by the nurse that's on staff. There will be one life skills group per evening, and every Monday there will be a community meeting where residents can voice their concerns, get questions answered, and rules can be reiterated. So we believe that there are many public benefits to this project, as PADS will steward the asset in a way that naturally supports the character of the area. The $7 million investment in the Fairbridge Inn is the largest investment since the assisted living facility was constructed across the street. Our ability to attract public funding and push it back into the community is a win for us all, and that is the nature of nonprofits. As mentioned before, our screening and monitoring systems will reduce potential crime in the area, while the renovations will transform the property from a blight on the community to a landscape property that supports better walkability. All of this is going to reduce the visual pollution that you see right there. Lastly, the community now has a partner that they can call when needed. We will have a 24-hour line where we can be reached should you need us. We are not a for-profit business and are interested in being integrated into the community in meaningful ways. Next slide. So this slide shows the kind of impact that we're kind of missing out on right now, and what fixed site shelters can bring. Fixed shelters have the ability to change the trajectory of our residents' lives and reduce homelessness in the area, reduce the recidivism rate, and ensure that we pump out continued and high-performing citizens. With rotating churches, we saw a 4% success rate into stable housing. Our temporary hotel model is seeing a 42% success rate into stable housing. And the future is fixed shelter, where our partners like DuPage PADS and Connections for the Homeless are seeing an 80 to 86% success rate into housing. So nonprofits have the capability to improve areas where commercial investment is challenging. This investment could be a catalyst for such corridor improvements. Our jobs that we're going to bring to the area, the security firm that we'll use is a local security firm to manage the property and ensure that it's safe overnight, including the areas nearby. And this investment could be a catalyst for those improvements. Our jobs and the new programs would add value to the local economy. And what we are hoping for is that we could begin to work together to develop this social safety net where we bring together a cross-section of stakeholders, nonprofits, businesses, governments, to tighten that social safety net and ensure that residents are not sleeping in cars, in parks, in yards, and in facilities not meant for human habitation. Thank you. You will now hear from Larry.
Again, my name is Larry Kearns, principal with Wheeler Kearns Architects. Could I have the next slide, please? This is a bird's eye view of the proposed improvements from the south and west. Grand Avenue is off to the right in this view. You'll notice that the major improvements exist along Grand Avenue. It's important to note that there's a Pace bus stop on this corner of Waveland and Grand Avenue on the side of the property. What we're proposing is to take 5,000 square feet of a pavement that exists on Grand Avenue and completely convert that, transform that into private gardens. As was mentioned before, Grand Avenue is a state road, so we'll have to work with the state to completely eliminate the curb cut that enters the property from Grand Avenue. When that curb cut is gone, that will allow us to have continuous landscape and sidewalk going completely along Grand Avenue to improve that pedestrian access. The dark green area, although it's shown as just low landscape, it needs to remain fairly low so that we have the proper vision triangle at the intersection. However, we will have the entire site conform to the current landscape ordinance in Gurnee. So that will include trees both along Waveland and along Grand Avenue. All of the gardens on Grand Avenue will be encircled by a 6-foot-high solid fence, providing mutually beneficial privacy and security both inside and outside. So even the porte cochere, what architects call the porte cochere, that's that area where cars would normally come to a hotel, that all remains now a pedestrian area, completely converted from the use. And those who are familiar with the history of this lot, the outlying buildings there, are the oldest buildings on the lot, those will remain as common elements. The porte cochere and lobby were added in the early 90s to the original building that was built in '85. Within the parking lot itself, which is now served by 2 curb cuts, there would just be a single curb cut on Waveland Avenue. Again, the parking lot would be completely fenced off or walled off with a solid fence. The parking lot right now on the west side has no trees. We will include 2 tree islands. One of those islands that you'll see on the next slide is actually, we're recommending, and I think staff would much rather see that right on the adjacent to the driveway. The other elements that have been talked about, maybe I can elaborate on those, were the cameras and the lighting. What's unique about the lighting is the lighting will be dual level lighting, and maybe you've seen this, but the lights will have a default low level, and when an individual is detected walking in the vicinity, that light individually will brighten, alerting both staff and the person walking that they've been detected. Which you'll also see on this site plan. Also, just to orient you, Grand Avenue in this view is at the bottom of the drawing, and Waveland Avenue is off to the left, just so we keep it straight here. Up to the upper left-hand side, we're showing the new trash enclosure here as well. So we do note the vision triangle that's required here at the corner. Again, that's adjacent to the bus stop. Okay, the next drawing, again to reorient you, Grand Avenue in this view now is off to the right-hand side. And these are 2 stacked floor plans of the building. The upper one being the second floor, which is predominantly the light orange color, which are the 20 units on the upper level. The blue, yellow, and dark orange are staff and common areas. If you look at the lower half of this drawing, this is the first floor. And you'll see that only the left-hand side is those units. So we have 10 units on the ground floor. We have 20 units above. The state code and local codes would require that 2 of the units on the ground floor be ADA accessible, right, which we will do. Throughout both floors, we need to have 4 units that will be for the hearing impaired with visual assists. Now, what was previously mentioned is that if the police, when and if the police have a need to house somebody on an urgent basis overnight. Those individuals will not be accommodated in the rooms, but will be supervised by staff that maintain the entry. It's important to realize that there are two exits to this building. The rear one, which is shown to the left-hand side of the building, this will have a delayed egress alarm, meaning that when you go to exit, a visual alarm will sound. The door will not release right away. There will be a delay so somebody can respond. You'll see these on art museums and other places, high security. The same will be here. Also important to note that we'll have an entry vestibule at the main entry so that it is easy for staff to control access. Could I have the next slide, please? These are typical architect drawings. They really do not contain any different information, but they show all the different elevations of the building. Again, we're not making radical changes to the structures in this case. We are improving some entries. Next slide, please. These are just current images of the site as it exists today. Next slide, please. Now, we draw everything today in 3 dimensions. So this is a computer rendering of the view. I'm now street view looking north and east from that corner of Waveland and Grand. Next slide, please. And this, again, I'm standing closer now on Grand looking at this. Again, not all the landscape is shown here. Everything you see in the foreground will be green space, but we do need to keep the landscape very low on this corner to maintain visibility. And now I will turn the presentation over to George Kiesel.
Thank you, Larry. Good evening, everyone. My name is George Kissel. I'm the president of Oak Rent Kissel Associates with offices at 141 West Jackson in Chicago. I'm a licensed architect and a certified planner with over 40 years of experience. I've been accepted as an expert in the courts of Cook, DuPage, Will, and Lake counties and appear regularly before administrative review boards such as this one throughout the region. I was engaged by PADS to provide an evaluation of the proposed text amendment and special use for a semi-private, non-congregate shelter providing on-site supportive services at the subject property. If I could have the next slide, please. So, if you go back one, maybe? Okay. So over the course of this presentation, I'm going to provide background and basis for my conclusions, referencing the broad and local land use context, the zoning context, the planning context, along with a discussion of the land use impacts of the proposal. Then I'll be addressing the standards for the approval of both text amendments and special uses. Before I get into that, though, I do want to again clarify that the type of facility that's being proposed. What's being contemplated here is a non-congregate shelter that provides on-site supportive services. This type of facility is indicative of a relatively new model of service that has markedly different land use characteristics than the typical congregate shelter model that's been prevalent in the past. Congregate facilities provide daily shelter for no more than 12 hours a day on a first-come, first-served basis or via a lottery system for admission until capacity is reached. They're often run out of churches, gymnasiums, community centers, etc., with groups of unhoused persons sleeping on cots or mats together in a large room. These types of facilities generally do not require zoning approval, as they're considered accessory uses to the principal uses of the structure. With these facilities, there's no guarantee of shelter on a day-to-day basis, and clientele must exit the facility for 12 hours of the day, typically occupying the public spaces surrounding the facility until that facility reopens. Again, that's not what's being proposed here. What is being proposed is a relatively new type of facility that provides longer-term interim shelter in a semi-private format with anywhere between 1 to 3 clients per room that provides on-site supportive services while more permanent housing solutions are sought. This model evolved during COVID when all the congregate shelters were closed for obvious health concerns. With 24 access to shelter and wraparound services, the advantages of this model include removing the unhoused from the streets, providing a more safe and dignified temporary housing solution, a safe place to store belongings, access to counseling, health care, employment and housing placement services, and increased positive outcomes in finding permanent housing. This has become the preferred and dominant model now for providing services to those experiencing homelessness. Over the last 18 months, I've worked on no fewer than 6 of these facilities. All have proposed an adaptive reuse of either a closed or marginal budget hotel or motel, former SROs, or multifamily structures, and all have similar capacities and configurations as to what is being proposed here. With that said, let's move on to a discussion of the land use context. If I could have the next slide, please. So we know the subject property is located in the East Grand Gateway District. The district is located at the eastern extremity of the village, adjacent to Waukegan, and is part of about a 3/4 mile commercial corridor along Grand Avenue that goes from US 41 on the west to Green Bay Road on the east. It's also one of the few corridors in Gurnee that is serviced by transit. As mentioned earlier, the Pace 565 bus that runs from the Waukegan Metro stop to the College of Lake County in Grays Lake stops along Grand Avenue. Could I have the next slide, please? In this segment, Grand Avenue is 2 lanes in each direction with a center left turn bay. The speed limit's 35, and the only stoplight between 41 and Green Bay is at Belle Plaine, which is a little bit west of the midpoint. The corridor developed during the 80s and is fully built out with no vacant frontage parcels. As far as the physical configuration goes, the district's characterized by smaller, multi-tenant strip centers and smaller single-occupant commercial buildings with parking in front. Buildings are occupied by local businesses with significant representation from service and personal service uses, such as Black and Gray Tattoo, Cosmo Pro Hair Salon, Pro Nails and Spa, Essence Salon Suites, Rose Cleaners, Tax and Beyond, along with several insurance agencies. There are also several thrift stores, such as the Salvation Army store, Community Thrift, a recently closed Habitat for Humanity Restore, and Love Twice, which is a resale shop. Also present are several employment agencies, such as All Staff, Temps Now, Jobs Trabajos, and Flexible Staffing. Several auto-related uses are also in the corridor, including McKagan Garage, Speedway, and Velasquez Auto. It should be noted that with the closing of Jimmy John's and the Himalaya restaurant in 2018, there are almost no restaurants within the Gurnee section of the district except for Big Norm's Hot Dogs. The only national franchises in the area are Harbor Freight, which is a discount tool store, Sherwin-Williams Paint and Supplies, and Speedway. Further west in Waukegan, at the intersection of Green Bay and Grand, are more established national franchises such as Jewel Osco, Walgreens, Fifth Third Bank, McDonald's, and Starbucks. Along with the commercial uses, there are 2 senior housing developments, including the Assisi Homes, which was constructed in the mid-90s. That's a subsidized senior independent living facility that was developed by Mercy Housing, a little more than a 1/4 mile east of the subject property. The 3-story structure contains 60 dwelling units and on-site amenities. The other senior housing development is Heritage Woods of Gurnee, a mixed-income assisted living facility located across Grand Avenue from the subject property at the southwest corner of Grand and Waveland Avenue. The 105-unit, 3-story structure was built in 2011. If I could have the next slide, please. So now we'll zoom in and look at the immediate context adjacent to the subject property. Across Waveland to the west of the subject property, we have U-Haul Rental. To the north, there's Gurnee Garden Center. To the east, we have Dirty Birdie Car Wash and Hirschenbach Mechanical Engineers, along with Malagan Auto on Grand. Across Grand to the southwest, as mentioned, is Heritage Woods of Gurnee. And across Waveland to the east of that is Temps Now. Subject property also has a Pace Route 565 bus at its southwest corner. All of the immediately adjacent neighbors are commercial uses of similar size and scale to the subject property. Hours of operation for these and almost all the businesses along the East Grand Gateway corridor are from morning to early evening, with most closed by 8 p.m. The only exceptions are currently the subject property motel use and the Speedway Fuel and Convenience Store 1 block east, both of which are 24-hour operations. Now we'll move on to the zoning context. So the subject property is zoned C2, a commercial community district, with the East Grand Gateway Overlay District applied. The C2 district is intended to accommodate highway-oriented commercial uses And there's no surprise, that's been applied along Grand Avenue pretty much for the length throughout Gurnee. The East Grand Gateway Overlay District adds provisions for additional uses, guidelines for enhanced landscape and streetscape treatments intended to enhance the appearance of the corridor as a gateway to the community and improve the pedestrian experience. The proposal before the board this evening is to amend the text of zoning ordinance provision 7.1-2, the use permissions, to allow emergency shelters as a special use in the East Grand Gateway Overlay District and clarify that self-storage facilities are permitted as of right. Could I have the next slide, please? So currently, emergency shelters are only permitted as special uses in the C3 Heavy Commercial District and the P Public Lands Special Overlay District. Since privately owned buildings are not allowed in the Public Lands Special District, emergency shelters of the type proposed, owned by PADS or by any other organization, are limited to the C3 district. The only C3 district property in the village is located near the intersection of Delaney Road and US 41 along the US 41 frontage and in an isolated irregular parcel of land about a mile northwest on 41 that's improved with a boat storage facility. These locations have no access to public transit and provide no opportunity to utilize an appropriate structure for shelter purposes. Now we'll move on to a discussion of the planning context. If I could have the next slide, please. Thank you. Gurnee's comprehensive plan was recently updated in 2020 and would normally be considered up to date. However, the document was drafted before the COVID-2019 global pandemic hit, and as such, it doesn't consider or address impacts of that significant event. Additionally, the village's comprehensive plan is mute on issues of homelessness and housing affordability. Those types of issues are usually addressed with federal grant money through either the CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, or the ESG, Emergency Solution Grant programs, as well as through state grants. The only municipalities of Waukegan and North Chicago qualify as entitlement communities with access to these funding sources. Lake County government acts as the entitlement community through which the rest of the county can access these programs. Through the county's most recent consolidated plan, which covers these programs, Lake County has recognized the need to address the growing problem of homelessness and lack of housing affordability. Recently, the Lake County Board has voted to forward grant proposals to access state funding to help this proposal, as well as PAD's recently approved proposal in Waukegan. If I could have the next slide, please. So the last 3 decades have seen several planning efforts directed towards the East Grand Gateway District. From the 1997 comp plan that discussed the creation of the district to a 2004 inventory and analysis making specific recommendations for each property, and a more recent 2016 Urban Land Institute Technical Assistance Program report that provided revitalization strategies for the district. That more recent 2016 strategy document is incorporated into the most current comprehensive plan. The strategies from that ULI study focus on creating an identity and improving the visual characteristics of the district. It focuses on transportation improvements, such as closing or consolidating curb cuts to enhance safety and ease congestion caused by turning vehicles, and enhancing landscape treatments to improve the pedestrian environment. It also mentions the possibility of transitioning to a more mixed-use environment to increase density and provide a more robust customer base for local businesses and increase pedestrian activity. If I could have the next slide, please. So the recent comp plan also calls out the district as an area for future land use change. The ULI study from 2016 indicates that the hospitality use on the subject property is a viable use due to the tourist entertainment traffic, and that the village should work with the property owner to bring that property up to standard. Unfortunately, there are no longer any complementary uses to support that use, and the validity of that suggestion should be called into question given current conditions. Despite all of these planning efforts over a very long period of time, little improvement or investment has occurred in the district. Now we're going to move on to a discussion of the likely land use impacts of the proposal. So, though the proposed use is typically classified as an institutional use, the land use characteristics are more similar to that of multifamily residential uses. The site's active throughout the day, with peak activity in the morning hours and early evening hours, and relatively little activity between the hours of sunset and sunrise when occupants are asleep. The density of the proposed use is similar to that which would be permitted for age-restricted housing in the village's R6 district, a district that would be appropriate for the subject property location and consistent with the senior housing developments in the East Grand Gateway District. With respect to the impact on public utilities, the proposed use will have similar demands on sewer and water resources as the prior use, which didn't really represent an unusual burden, so there's no reason that there would be an issue with public utilities from the proposed use. With respect to traffic and parking demand, the prior motel use did not cause any significant traffic issues. Given the fact that most of the anticipated site occupants for the proposed use won't have vehicles and a modest employee count on site, there's no reason to believe that there will be an undue burden on traffic or street parking. In fact, closing of the curb cut on Grand will reduce turning conflicts and likely have a positive effect on congestion in the vicinity of the subject property. With respect to public services for police, EMS, fire, and schools, we start off with a discussion of the burden on police resources. We know this is a hot button item, so we're going to go into a little bit of a depth here. We obtained and examined data through FOIA from the Gurnee Police Department, who we thank for their efforts. It's important to know what you're looking at when you get police data. There are generally two sources. There's incident data, which typically comes from their records management, or RMS system, and there's what's often referred to as call data from the computer-aided dispatch system, or the CAD system. When you get data from the CAD system, it includes a lot of information that may not be relevant to what you're looking at or looking for in terms of police incident activity. CAD data includes things like traffic stops where there is no incident, administrative tasks, well-being checks, and directed patrol. The RMS data relates only to actual incidents recorded. To ascertain the baseline impact on police service, we took a look at the RMS data for Beat 82, which includes the subject property. If I could have the next slide, please. So what we're looking at here is data from 2017 through this year, with the 2024 data being prorated from what was available for the first quarter of this year from January through March. Also superimposed on the graph are indications of the degree to which PAD's clientele have been present at the location. That's the yellow text in percentages. The light blue portion of the bars illustrate the portion of incidents at the subject property, compared to the total present in the beat. We see that before PAD's client presence, total beat incidents ranged from about 140 to 169, with incidents at the subject property ranging between 21 and 50. During PAD's client presence, total incidents ranged between 124 and 173, with those at the subject property between 20 and 55. In general, there's no appreciable increase in police incidents at the subject property or in Beat 82 during the period when PAD's clientele was present. For most of the period where PAD's clients were present, their occupancy was very modest in terms of the percent of room days occupied. In fact, when PAD's increased the number of rooms occupied in 2024, first quarter data indicated that the annual number for total and on-site incidents would decrease. It should be noted that this data is for a period where only a clientele occupied rooms. PADS provided no on-site supervision, program, or security. In analyzing potential impact on police resources, we also relied on a prior study of incident data for a similar project in Evanston, the Margarita Inn, operated by Connections for the Homeless. In a little bit, you'll be hearing from Betty Bogg, their executive director, about their experience. That study revealed that between 60 and 70 incidents attributable to the Margarita Inn for their first 2 years of operation between March of 2020 and March of 2022. It should be noted that most of those incidents were minor, and about a third occurred within the facility and had no impact on the surrounding neighborhood. It's also been indicated that over the last 2 years, the volume of incidents has decreased. The Margarita Inn is similar in size and occupancy to what's being proposed by PADS, and it would be expected that the incident volume may be similar. In the context of the over 50,000 police incidents annually in the village, 60 to 70 incidents do not represent an undue burden on police resources. Can I have the next slide, please? That shouldn't be the next slide, but if you could back it up one more. Thanks. So moving on to other public services. With respect to fire and EMS services, again, for evaluation, we rely on the prior study of the similar facility in Evanston. EMS fire calls to Margarita Inn ranged between 30 to 45 calls annually for the first 2 years. It should be noted that the proposed use services vulnerable populations, and an increase in calls for service can generally be expected. For context, however, housing facilities for seniors typically generate about 3 to 5 times more call volume than that what may be anticipated at the PADS facility. Like the police impact, in a context of over 6,000 EMS and fire calls annually, in Gurnee, the likely call volume for the subject property does not represent an undue burden with respect to school, does not represent an undue burden. With respect to schools, there'll be no impact or burden as the facility is only intended to serve adults. Finally, with respect to property values, numerous studies have been authored on the subject of the impact of shelter facilities on property values for surrounding neighborhoods. Results vary based on the type of shelter facility that's studied. Literature indicates that shelter facilities that offer 24-hour shelter and wraparound support for clients, supportive shelters, have positive outcomes. 2 often cited studies on this subject that focus on supportive shelter facilities are from the Furman Center for Real Estate and Urban Policy in New York, and another from the Urban Institute in Washington, D.C. that studied facilities in Denver, Colorado. Both indicate no negative impacts on property values over time. In addition, we reference a recent study specific to these types of developments by an appraisal firm regarding the impact from the Margarita Inn and similar facilities during their periods of operation. The study utilized a match pair analysis for the 2 years of operation of the Margarita Inn and for a similar facility in Oak Park, the Wright Inn. The conclusions are consistent with the other studies in that there were no indication of negative impact on property values from non-congregate supportive facilities. It should also be mentioned that there are positive attributes that are associated with non-congregate supportive facilities like that being proposed. As we've already heard, they include removing the unhoused population from the streets, public spaces, and unmonitored vacant lots, providing wraparound services on site, leading to increased success in finding permanent housing solutions, on-site security and monitoring and property management, and a similar land use characteristics to multifamily residential that enhance mixed-use environments. With all of that out of the way, let's take a look at the standards for text amendments and special uses. So with respect to text amendments, the process for amending the text in the ordinance or the zoning map is intended to allow modifications in response to omissions, errors, change conditions, or changes in village policy. In this case, there are change conditions, the first being the increase in homelessness in northeastern Lake County, and the second is a change in the way in which services for the unhoused are being provided. Taken together, these changes merit a reconsideration of the capacity to accommodate appropriate facilities within the village of Gurnee for their zoning ordinance. Moving on to the actual standards, the proposed text amendment promotes public health, safety, and welfare by increasing opportunities for the location of emergency shelters consistent with state mandates regarding the rights of unhoused persons. It's promoting the development of facilities that have a positive impact on vulnerable populations, as well as providing benefits to the surrounding community by removing the unhoused from the streets, public spaces, and unmonitored vacant lots, and adding a potential client base for surrounding businesses and its occupants and the employees that will be on site. Allowing for the location of emergency shelters in an area where the use would be compatible with surrounding uses and benefit from access to employment, services, and transit. And finally, by addressing a social and economic problem that is prevalent throughout the state, region, and local communities. The proposal is consistent with the village's adopted comprehensive plan and the incorporated Urban Land Institute revitalization strategies for the East Grand Avenue report, in that it will encourage development that can leverage public funds for investment in an area where no private investment has been forthcoming. It encourages development where investment utilizing public funds can be used to upgrade streetscape and transportation conditions, and it allows for the development that can increase the customer base for nearby compatible businesses that service lower income clientele. Finally, we get to the special use standards. With respect to the special use standards, the proposed use does not involve any characteristics that would cause an increase with respect to endangering public health, safety, and welfare. The proposed use does not involve any characteristics that would cause an increase in danger of fire, explosion, contamination, noise, odor, vibration, or any other environmental impact. Studies also indicate, as you've heard, that this type of facility does not have a negative effect on the value of surrounding property, nor does it significantly increase crime in their vicinity. The proposed facility is similar in size and capacity to that of other non-congregate emergency shelter facilities. It is not extraordinary or burdensome in its expected land use impacts. The proposed facility will be operated by PADS, Lake County, a local, experienced, and established provider of services to the unhoused and vulnerable populations. The presence of PADS clients at the subject property has not resulted in increased crime, and indeed incident reports appear to have declined as PADS utilized more rooms at the location. Finally, the proposed facility will provide 24-hour access to shelter and support services and have the effect of removing the unhoused from the streets, public spaces, and unmonitored vacant properties. The proposal is also compatible with the general land use of adjacent properties and other property within the immediate vicinity, in that the proposed shelter will function much in a similar manner as multifamily residential uses, which are not in conflict with Grand Avenue Gateway Overlay District commercial uses, nor the surrounding residential uses. The proposed emergency shelter is compatible with the surrounding commercial, retail, and service businesses in the area with respect to traffic generation, parking demand, noise, odor, vibration, and hours of activity. The East Grand Gateway District is home to numerous businesses that are complementary to an emergency shelter, as mentioned earlier. It is also consistent with the spirit and intent of the Village of Gurnee zoning ordinance and adapted village land use policies. It provides a development scenario that can leverage public funds for investment in the East Grand Gateway Overlay District where no private investment has occurred. It provides development where investment in utilizing public funds are used to upgrade streetscape and transportation, and it provides development similar to multifamily housing that, again, can increase customer base for nearby compatible businesses. And it conforms to all the other applicable regulations of this ordinance, and that the structure conforms to the regulations in place at the time of approval and construction, and any deviations from the current ordinance are allowed to continue as per the regulations contained in Section 17 of the Village Code that addresses nonconformities. No material modifications to the structure are contemplated that would be subject to current zoning regulations. The proposed site improvements regarding landscaping and screening will conform to village guidelines and standards. Next slide, please. Finally, in conclusion, the proposed text amendment for emergency shelters in the East Grand Gateway Overlay District meets the standards for approval for text amendments contained in Section 16.5 of the Village of Gurnee Ordinance. The proposed special use for a semi-private non-congregate emergency shelter in this location providing on-site supportive services to be operated by PADS meets the standards for approval for special uses contained in Section 16.5C of the Village of Gurnee zoning ordinance. And the proposed semi-private non-congregate emergency shelter with on-site supportive services fulfills an urgent public need and provides a facility proximate to vulnerable populations. It will renovate and reinvigorate a dilapidated structure and provide much-needed investment in an important commercial corridor where private investment has been lacking for decades. Given the above, it's respectfully submitted that a positive recommendation for the proposal from the Village of Gurnee Planning and Zoning Board is deserved, as is final approval from the Village Board of Gurnee. With that, I'm going to turn it over to April Redzik to speak about the PADS Lake County.
I'll go as quickly as I can. Good evening and hello. My name is April Redzik. Pardon?
Excuse me. Hey, whoa. This is not the. This is not the time for public comment. Please?
Yes,
Yes,
yes, there will. You know, everybody has to follow the standards of decorum. You're actually prolonging it by interrupting the presentations. And so if you're going to be disruptive, you're going to have to be asked, we're going to have to ask you to leave. So please respect the person that's speaking, and they'll do the same for you.
Okay, you may
Go
continue.
ahead.
Go
Okay.
ahead.
Good evening and hello. My name is April Redzik. I am President and CEO of DuPage Pads. I've been invited here by Alan to share a little bit about our work and to address some of the items that have come up in some of the past city council meetings. I've known Alan, current CEO of Lake County Pads, because he was Director of Interim Housing when I became CEO of DuPage County Pads in 2020. Alan effectively moved our operations from congregate shelter for 50 people per night at 3 different sites each night to a hotel model that morphed into what is our interim housing center, which is the model of service we're using today. I'm really proud of our work to help families and individuals who would have had nowhere safe to sleep, shower, or eat, and I'm grateful for your ears for a few minutes. I'm not from Gurnee, and my experience has been with Downers Grove, so I can't speak to what you're experiencing here, but I can share the experience we've had in operating an interim housing center since March of 2022, which is when we acquired our property. I know there were some questions around FOIA data from DuPage following one of your meetings, so I wanted to address a little bit of that and give some context for it. There was a FOIA request that noted that over a 7-month time frame, there were 196 calls from our address over 7 months. And so I thought it would be helpful to list what they were for. That's about 28 per month, or about once per day. So I went into our data for the month of June, which is last month, and here were the emergency service visits that we had documented over the past month. Of the 21 calls that we have attached to incident reports that came in June, 6 were medical interventions. 4 were for a family safety situation. We have families and individuals in the same building in Downers Grove. 4 were a client who needed some mental health supports. 2 were property damage, and 3 were unsafe behaviors that had resulted in an exit. So that data was for 21 incidents, and again, I said 28 individually. The remaining 7 were most likely from a client who'd been staying with us with an alert bracelet that she was keeping in her backpack. And so we had a few extra calls that would have been attached to that. However, she's now in the hospital due to her medical condition. Another question that had come up was property value, and I think I want to share what I can in context for that too. Again, I'm not from Gurnee, so I can't speak to your municipality's real estate, but here's data from Downers Grove. According to Zillow, the average home value in Downers Grove in March of 2022 was $406,684. Today, it's $462,578, so that's a 13.7% increase. On July 18th, when I was doing my research, Zillow reported an 8.1% increase just over the past year. Other data I can share from our experience in buying a hotel and converting it to give people a safe place to stay. In 2020, there were 13 people encamped in the Downers Grove parking structure downtown, with an additional few in local parks. So I called the village to see where we're at today, and there's now 0 people in the parking structure and 2 in local parks. Of those 2 who are in the parks with their belongings, 0 of those in the parks are at DuPage Pads Interim Housing Center because our clients would be staying with us and not unsheltered. I want to explain this in a little more detail because it's confusing if you don't work in social services. Not everyone who is homeless is a client of PADS. Some people just don't want to go into shelter. I think I'm nice, but they may not want to come in. Some people don't qualify for shelter because we do screen for the safety of our guests on site. We help as many people who are homeless as we can to have a safe place to stay, but someone who's sleeping on a sidewalk or a bench or who's on a sidewalk with their belongings would not be a PADS Interim Housing Center client, because if they were, they would be inside. They'd be sleeping safe with us and their belongings would be in their room. They wouldn't be with them. Some other data points that I would like to share with you. We gave a safe place to sleep to 734 individuals and families last year. 493 of them have obtained stable housing. The remaining guests who we listed last year are still staying with us in hopes of having a home of their own as well. Those who are taking the longest to house right now are actually all seniors. Those who are over 60 make up 1/3 of our interim housing client population. They're waiting for senior housing, and some of them have been told that it's a 3-year wait list. Our oldest client is 88, and she suffers from dementia. She came to us very scared, and the routine and stability of an interim housing center has helped her to manage her conditions. 30% of those who are staying with us have fled violence. Because we have an interim housing center, they can sleep without worrying that someone will hurt them. We did a study also on client health, and we've seen a 75% decrease in the need for medical respite services for our clients. So people who are staying with us in rooms rather than being out in the elements during the day are having fewer incidents of pneumonia or bronchitis or flu or other illnesses. And this is good not only for them, but for our local hospitals. Our local hospitals, we're right by Good Sam. They can now refer people who are homeless in their ERs into our programming. And there are also fewer physical injuries from people who've slipped on the ice or suffered from heat exhaustion or had frostbite or sustained injuries from extreme weather like a tornado when people have shelter. That also means if someone gets in a car accident and needs to get into the ER, it is not as backed up because there's not other people who are trying to stay there just to have a safe place to stay. Many of our clients have found jobs at local businesses that are near the interim housing center. The majority of our adult clients come in with a job, but it's typically not enough to support their rent, and that's how they've become homeless and come in to see us. So with a stable place to stay, they're finding better paying opportunities at places like Good Samaritan Hospital, the 2 local coffee chains that are across the street from our building, and at virtually every local restaurant in our area that is within walking distance. And I've added that those who aren't employing our staff typically donate meals to them, so we love them too. In short, we've seen our interim housing center save lives. I see it every day from our 20-something guests who suffers from weekly seizures and needs us to call for medical attention so he survives. And yes, that was one of our FOIA reports. To the 30-something mom who told me she's been a human trafficking victim in Lake County and came to us for help. She was chained to her hotel room before she was able to get services. And I want to tell you that for people like her, it truly is life-changing and it's keeping her safe. We've been able to help her recover so she could get back on her feet. Also for our seniors who need a daily safety check until they can make it into senior housing. I see children who are able to connect to schools and are learning to roller skate on our property. I've seen 8 babies born while their moms were staying with us on our property. They were able to come back to us after the maternity ward to have a room with a crib, diapers, and food rather than sleeping in a car. And isn't everyone someone's child? Wouldn't you like everyone, regardless of their age, to be able to sleep in a safe place? Thank you for listening.
Please, no clapping, no hooting, no hollering. Please. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to address everyone here at tonight's meeting. My name is Betty Bogg. I'm the Chief Executive Officer of Connections for the Homeless, based in Evanston, Illinois. We serve more than 40 communities in north suburban Cook County. I grew up in Hinsdale, not Gurnee, attended the University of Illinois, and since then, I've spent 30 years working in social service organizations across the Chicagoland area. My work has focused on developing a philosophy of care and a model of operations guided by the latest data on what people experiencing homelessness need to get back on their feet and restore stability to their lives. By extension, when everyone has a safe place to live, the entire community is able to thrive. As part of my career, I had the honor to work with Alan Swilley, in 2019 and 2020. Alan was a shelter manager at Connections, and in that role, he demonstrated not only deep professionalism and skill, but also a creative drive that helped dramatically increase the number of people who were able to find housing after working with our case managers. Like me, Alan does this work because it benefits the entire community, not just the individuals with whom we work directly. Now, it's tempting to think that building a shelter for people experiencing homelessness is the reason why people who are without homes are here, but that's not what the data shows. The truth is, all across the country, people are doubling up with friends and family, living in cars and couch surfing to provide themselves with shelter and safety. Millions of people are a layoff, a medical emergency, or a car repair away from not being able to make ends meet. And this is true even in a wealthy suburb like Evanston with block upon block of mansions. In fact, almost 90% of the 180 people who resided in our shelter in the last year have roots in Evanston. Overwhelmingly, the data shows that people stay in the community in which they were housed when they lose that housing. Several weeks ago, the Alliance to End Homelessness in suburban Cook County released the results of the latest point-in-time count of homelessness, which the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development conducts each year. The last count took place on January 31st. The results were predictable but still shocking. Compared to just 1 year earlier, overall homelessness in suburban Cook County increased by 13%. There was a 9% increase in the sheltered population, which is a sign that more shelters are coming online, but there was also a 58% increase in the unsheltered population, which simply means that people are losing their homes faster than shelter space is coming online. The combined effects of the rising cost of homes, rising rents, and rising prices for everything else triggered by historic inflation rates of the last few years are worsening the problem of homelessness everywhere across the country, including in Chicago, in Evanston, and here in Gurnee. So we find ourselves at an inflection point. In the face of this crisis, we have a choice. One option is to do nothing, shut our eyes to the problem and hope that some other community does what we refuse to do. Doing nothing guarantees that the crisis grows worse. It may not be visible at first because people will do almost anything to avoid having to sleep in the street, but eventually their options run out and it will manifest visibly. Our other option is to build infrastructure capable of meeting the needs of people who become unhoused and to provide those people with what they need to get back on their feet. The well-being that people experience changes profoundly when they have a door, a mattress, a bathroom with a shower, a closet, things that we all take for granted, things that everyone needs in order to thrive. In addition to that, people in fixed-site shelters like ours and the one Pads Lake County is proposing can engage right on the premises with mental health care professionals, medical providers, and housing case managers so they can heal while they establish and execute their plans for finding a housing solution. As we do this work, it's critical that our decisions are guided by data, not by stereotypes, and that we make our choices based on facts, not fear. We have been operating a fixed-site hotel-based shelter in Evanston for over 4 years. And late last fall, we completed the purchase of that hotel called the Margarita Inn with the help of funds from Cook County. We went through a process much like this one to make that a reality, and we heard from many people opposed to an ongoing shelter. A year and a half after we secured a permit from the city of Evanston to purchase the shelter, however, the fears of the future have gone from a roar to a whisper. Why? Because there really haven't been serious issues. I'm aware that a commenter at the last hearing brought up that there were 12 emergency calls to the Margarita in the first quarter of 2024, so let's dig into that a little bit. Only one of those 3 calls was to the police. Only 3 of those calls were to the police. The rest were to paramedics. The 3 police calls were about minor disputes between residents, and they were resolved without arrest. She also claimed that there were 3,100 emergency calls from a 4-block radius around the Margarita between December 2023 and July of 2024. So let me dig into that a little bit. This sounds like a very big number, but 4 blocks in each direction from a single point is a...
Excuse me, ma'am. Mr. Meeks, at this point in time, I'm going to have to ask Pads to have the rest of the presentation be specific to this proposal.
Yeah, at this point, this is the public hearing, so prior comments are not part of the record of this proceeding. So
Okay.
It's not necessary to address those at this time. The petitioner will have a time to address any questions and any comments that come up in public comment. But to do that at this point, since we haven't opened the floor yet to public comment, please save those remarks for a later time.
Sure. So thank you for your time.
I mean, if that's, you know, if you're on that same line, you know.
I mean, if you have something specific to
To
the
the-
Fairbridge proposal, you're more than welcome to speak, but as Mr. Winters indicated,
No, I understand your point. Actually, what I'd like to do is just introduce my friend Lauren Taylor, who joins us. He's a resident of the Margarita Inn, and he can share the experience of a person
Mr.
living
Meek?
in a shelter.
I need it to be specific to Fairbridge.
Hi, is the presentation over?
No,
Okay, okay.
No.
Because I have the counter
No.
presentation after with one sheet.
excuse me. They're giving a presentation, we're giving them some guidance in terms of what we feel is appropriate. We'll open the floor to the public at the appropriate point in time, as I indicated before. No. The floor is not open to the public, sir. Mr. Meeks.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. We asked Mr. Taylor to speak for a couple of minutes to give some context to what an experience living in a shelter like this can be. The shelter does not exist today. Part of the context of this is the certain assumptions about what this is. We've tried to lay out some of the facts about this. I think we're looking for a little bit of it's subject matter expert, if you will, testimony from Mr. Taylor. It'll be brief, and that will conclude our presentation.
Oh,
He will be the last.
Is that the last one?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Please, residents, you're embarrassing Gurnee, so please let me run the meeting.
Good evening. My name is Lauren Taylor. I'm a resident of the Margarita Inn in Evanston. I don't have a lot of data for you, but what I do want to do is kind of share a little bit of experience of how I got there and what's happened to me since I've been there. And in light of all of this, I'll try to do it as briefly as I can. Story starts with my late mother, who had a stroke in 2012. 50 years as an educator, you know, community, pillar of the community. Taking care of her as her unpaid, live-in, full-time caregiver was definitely the greatest work that I've done to date, bar none, okay? Part of taking care of her was helping her with a dispute that she had had with her condo association that went back to when they tried to convert from co-op to condo. And, you know, they spent about a good 6-7 years, you know, trying to evict her and take possession of her apartment, of her condo. That dispute ended when she died on the morning of Juneteenth, 2023. And fast forward, basically what was worked out was the condo association would take possession of the apartment and I would leave by the end of the year. I was all excited about moving on with my life. Then in November of 2023, I was diagnosed with stage 4 metastatic prostate cancer and told that without the treatment, I would have about 3 months to live, okay? So, you know, taking the treatment really wasn't an option. That's kind of what I had to do. And, you know, I did the best that I could on my own, as long as I could, and, you know, did have a very, you know, strong and wide supportive network that was trying to help me through that, but it wasn't enough. And I realized that when I was at the grocery store one afternoon and almost passed out in the grocery store, okay? Don't know how I made it back to the Airbnb room where I was staying. And that kind of brought me to a point where it really just seemed like, trying to look at my, you know, that I really only had kind of like 2 options or 2 paths. One would have been just to give up, you know, just to say that this is really heavy for me and, you know, it's not sure that I'm going to survive this anyway. Or the other path would have been to just, you know, keep fighting, and keep fighting through the, embarrassment of potentially being unhoused, and maybe only survive another year or two, from the stress. I mean, I couldn't sit up straight in a chair, okay? What I didn't know was that there was a third path, right? A place where I could rest, a place where I could just block out everything and focus on what I really needed to do was concentrate on my health and my recovery. And I found that place. It was the Margarita Inn. It was the Margarita Inn. I can stand here today and tell you I would not be standing here today if it wasn't for the Margarita Inn and for finding this place. They really saved my life. They really did. Okay? And it's not just this idea of, having a place to stay and, 3 meals to eat, but a lot of what they have been telling you about, what they, want to do here in Gurnee. I mean, the structure of it, case managers, medical professionals, a healthcare coordinator, who helped me with, vision and dental and, getting a colonoscopy that, I probably was, 10 years overdue from having. And so what I can tell you standing here today is, yeah, it worked. It worked. All of the recent tests that I've taken shows that there's no trace of prostate left. I mean, there's no trace of cancer left in my prostate. 95% of the places where they found the cancer, it doesn't appear, and whatever little metabolic activity that they have left doesn't suggest cancer. So I guess I can't really say that I'm, quote, cancer-free, but I'm definitely cancer surviving, okay? And what was also important was that this is a peaceful place, right? I can tell you, the Margarita Inn is quiet. I mean, it's like hospital quiet. It's scary quiet sometimes, okay? And like I say, that was the thing that, I needed. And as I say, because of that, that's why I'm standing in front of you here today, okay? I can kind of like wrap up, or I'll just kind of end with just, 2 more points, try to get these out real quickly. I can tell you sincerely that whatever it is that you think that you know about the unhoused, whatever you think you know about what kind of people they are or where they come from or what their circumstances are, I can tell you from personal experience that that's probably not the case. I'm a graduate of Northwestern Medill School of Journalism. I have a lifetime of, being gainfully employed and part of the community, right? Serving my community. This goes back in my family, a couple of generations. And quite honestly, I would take offense to anybody that would suggest that I'm, living on the public dole or something like that. I've put in my time helping people. Now it's my turn. Now it's my turn to get some help. And I don't have one shred of guilt or, apologies for taking this help right now when I need it, okay? And so, as I say, whatever it is that you think that you may know about being unhoused, I'm here to tell you, look, as I said, I'm a journalist. I'm not here to tell you about what I think or how I feel about this. I'm here to tell you about what I know. And what I know is that the Margarita Inn saved my life, okay? So if there's anything about my personal experience that will, help you in making this decision, I hope I've been able to, kind of give you another perspective to it, and I would be happy to answer any of your questions either now or in the future. Thank you.
Please, no applause, please.
I want to wrap up and just say thank you. That's all. So I just want to say thank you for allowing us to present today. Okay. And I appreciate the time that you took, and I appreciate everybody here. The emotions are high. I appreciate that. The fears are real. We value that, and thank you so much for the time. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Once again, I'll go explain the procedures for tonight's meeting. We have now just heard the presentation from the petition. Once again, I'll go through the protocols for this evening's meetings. The petitioner has now completed their presentation. The next phase of our meeting is a round of questions only from the planning and zoning members. So the people in the aisle, you can stand there if you want, but it's not your turn to speak yet. So at this point, however long it takes, sir, we have a responsibility here to listen and hear this matter in a fair.
Okay, here, just so that everybody understands, it will be a late meeting, okay? But trust me, interruptions are just going to prolong this. So it will be a late meeting. If there aren't interruptions, it will go much quicker. At this point now, it's an opportunity, as the chairman has indicated, it's an opportunity for the Plan Commission members, if they had any specific questions initially with respect to the presentation, the chairman will recognize them.
Okay, thank you. All right, who'd like to start?
Thank you.
Go ahead, Liliana.
Thank you for the presentation. I just want to acknowledge that any event in our lives can happen, and we can be homeless, and that can happen to anybody. So I appreciate the work that Pat has done. Thank you very much, and the support you give. And one of the things, I was there this morning, and I'm glad that the place that you chose is far from a school. That was one of my main concerns. It's not within walking distance from a school. Spalding? All right. I
don't know
drove it
what I
today.
have to say to you people. You're embarrassing the village of Gurnee every time you outburst.
My apologies, I drove it today, so I didn't think it was walking, so my apologies. I have questions. You mentioned a robust security system, for entry and bringing unauthorized guests. How about your security system for your residents to go out? Do you have any way to, I know it's not a prison, but, just to make sure that they're not out loitering in the streets? That's my
And you're
number
going to
one
have to use
question.
the microphone. You have to use the microphone.
I have 3 questions. Do I?
That's fine.
Okay. Can I make the 3 questions?
Well,
Let him answer? Okay.
So I just want to clarify the question. The question is, what does ingress and egress look like for our clients, entry and exit?
I'm talking about physical, not your system, but,
Right. Yeah,
at
this is
night,
a-
during the day,
This is not a locked facility, and so what that means is that if clients do not want to participate in shelter services, then they can no longer be participants or residents inside of the shelter. And so we will have, an example of that would be curfew. While we can't force clients to stay in for curfew, what we can do is enforce the rule of curfew and leverage that to determine whether or not that individual gets to stay in shelter. And so we do have rules in place that make it so that there aren't guests that come in or out during overnight hours, and there are no guests allowed on the property at any given time, at any given moment. One of the reasons why we have the delayed exit, which is probably what you're responding to, is we want to just make sure that for the safety of our residents and for the rules that we have, if someone is trying to sneak someone in or something like that, we would know about it. And so there is a delayed exit, but not necessarily a locked facility where they would not be able to exit the facility. It would be up to fire code standards.
okay. You also mentioned that you try for them to stay off the streets during the daytime as well as night. How do you do that?
So the current shelter system or the previous shelter system, our church system, only allowed for shelter overnight. But the current model that we use, the hotel model, allows for clients to stay sheltered during the daytime. I don't know if you guys are aware, but the previous church shelter system would drop clients off and they would disperse into the community. And that no longer exists because most of those clients are housed, to the best of our ability, are sheltered. And so that would be the difference when we talk about sheltering clients in the daytime as well as sheltering clients at night. A lot of our clients, one of the challenges that we see with our shelter clients is, and this is a motivation thing, is they don't necessarily want to move around. They don't, once they get settled in and once the exhaustion wears off, they want to stick around. And for us, we want to create a program that kind of motivates them to get back on their feet as fast as possible, as opposed to kind of lounging around inside of the space every day.
Two real quick questions, follow-up. Is there programming mandatory during the day?
Yes.
Mandatory?
Yes.
They have to be. And how do you check that? How do you?
Yes. So every client that comes through shelter, that comes through our processing center, has a service plan. That service plan is customized to their needs. Some clients already have some clients already have employment, or maybe even a housing voucher and just can't find housing. And so their work, more than likely, is to go to work and then when they're not working, work on housing. And so depending on their specific service plan, they will be required to participate in certain levels of service. What we have identified is that the main service opportunities that we see to restore a client's potential is employment, drug, substance use services, and employment, substance use services, I'm drawing a blank, and medical and mental health services.
Last one, real quickly. It was mentioned that no substance use in or on shelter premises. What type of substances are you referring to? Is smoking allowed? Do you do any drug testing? I think that was touched earlier, though.
Controlled substances are not allowed on the property. We don't currently do drug tests. We do offer a harm reduction policy where we understand that substance use is a disability, but we do not allow for substance use on the property. So we know that some of our clients, and there are a lot of residents that are dealing with substance use, and so we want to give them the opportunity and a second chance to get back on their feet. And so we leverage our skill sets to meet their needs where they are, while also holding them accountable to the rules that we have.
Todd?
Thank you for your all's presentation. Just a couple of questions here. Your services, can you elaborate more like on what type of employment services you give, what type of substance abuse, mental health? You just say you have them, but can you kind of elaborate on how they are conducted and stuff?
Yeah, there is and I'm sure you guys are aware of this, but there is a severe skills gap in Lake County, and that skills gap makes it difficult for individuals to reach up to a new salary that responds to the change in external environment, higher rent prices, food, stuff like that. And so one of the services that we want to pursue is the skill development and new skill development of individuals that come through our program. It's different. This is something, there are multiple services that the Job Center offer, and they would be our partner in that process. They have a plethora of resources that we would leverage, and we want to make sure that these co-located programs and these tight partnerships are what we leverage to maximize resources. And so we're looking at resume development, we're looking at interview preparation, we're looking at skill building, and then ensuring that clients know how to search for jobs. So now we have a process where our case managers work with individuals that have employment services as a part of their service plan, where they would have to do at least 2 job applications per week to get back on their feet. Depending on the level of intensity of programming, we may be able to increase that, right? And depending on the level of access to internet services through the digital divide in Lake County, we should be able to maximize their opportunity to access new job opportunities.
Well, what about the substance abuse and mental health? How is those programs put together?
Sure. So NACASA is our substance use counseling partner. And our mental health services will be provided by us in-house. We are currently hiring for a behavioral health specialist and also a full-time nurse, both full-time positions.
Okay. I think, and occupancy, I assume some will be, these won't be co-ed occupants, am I understanding?
It will be. So currently, our shelter system is equal, half and half, 49.5% women, 49.5% men, specifically to the individuals, not necessarily, we disaggregate the families. And so when we look at the individuals, who are the individuals that will be in this shelter, we have a half and half. It's really critical to keep that equity, because while men in the unsheltered environment represent the majority of individuals unsheltered, we know that women are most vulnerable. And so we want to make sure that we keep that equity inside of our shelter.
I was referring to the shared rooms.
Oh, sorry. Yeah. We would separate by gender and ensure that people are safe. We have not decided yet whether that would be co-ed floors or separated floors, men, women.
Okay.
I have a few questions for you. First of all, I thank you for your presentation. Now, how will the facility be transitioned from what it is now to what you want it to be? What's the process you will use, and how long do you think it's going to take?
So a lot of the criteria associated with how we identify a property like this was to think about what it would look like for us to acquire it and renovate it as quickly as possible using a model that we know is successful. We want to always leverage best practices. So that means a hotel model that may need some renovations, an opportunity to invest in the community, but then an opportunity to also ensure that the structure that we're engaging with is familiar to us, because we've been operating hotels for the last 4 years. And so what that looks like is right away, if we get approval for this process, we will start the renovations as soon as we can.
And so that means that it will no longer be a temporary shelter almost immediately, right?
Can you clarify what you mean?
Well, you're transitioning it to another type of shelter, so as soon as you get the okay, if you get the okay to do something, you will stop it being a temporary shelter right away?
Yeah, so we don't own the property, we just rent rooms. And those rooms that we rent are for emergency purposes only because of the condition of the property. So we have other locations where we have the majority of our clients, but these rooms specifically, which the chart showed where we occupied only 3.5% for a couple of years, and then this year we've occupied about 30%. The reason for that is just because the numbers are just astronomical, and so it's not necessarily a temporary shelter right now. It is still a hotel where we just rent rooms. We don't have services there. We don't have staff there. We have no supervision there. But when we take it over, all those things will be transposed upon that location immediately.
I think the question that is trying to be asked here is, how long is it going to take from a day that you may receive approval to the time that you completely transition it to what you want it to be?
So our architect could probably answer that, and before he comes up, we're hoping for a late spring entry.
Okay.
I know that's pretty aggressive, but we need it.
All right, and then some other questions. You have very specific skills for your employees. How do you intend to recruit and retain them?
One of our main priorities is to be the employer of choice, and as such, that means to invest in our employees as much as we can, and we've done that. So we've offered trainings. A lot of our employees have gone to shipper trainings in Bloomington, Illinois. A lot of them attend trainings with the Ryan Dowd Center, and we are also gonna be on a regimen of trainings for specifically therapeutic crisis intervention. And that's a model that allows us to help clients process their situations and issues as they come up, and it changes the synapses in the brain so that eventually, if they have trouble problem solving, eventually they won't. And so our job is to ensure that we pour into our staff so that they can pour into our clients. And we've already started to do that. And so those specific skills would include things like de-escalation, therapeutic crisis intervention, collaborative problem solving, and developing sophisticated interventions based on the challenges that we see when it comes to the rules that may get broken or any kind of interpersonal conflict.
So I need a little bit more clarification on the answer that you just gave me, and that is, are you hiring the people that have the skills when you're hiring them? Because you mentioned a lot of training that your employees go through. Is that after you hire them, then you build their skills, or the skills are coming in right away? My concern is
Okay, got
that
it.
you may not have the staff to do what you need to do day one.
But got it. Sorry about that. Both. And so there is the work that we do can be taught. And what we need to identify is competency and commitment. And so we often hire individuals that already have those skills. But if they don't have those skills, they will go through trainings to develop those skills. We have on-site onboarding trainings that that our staff currently do to develop those skills.
All right, and say, for example, you are favorable and we vote yes. Would you be open to having a community partnership where residents are involved in what's going on there? They're updated about how the construction is going on, how you're making the transition, how you're handling the people, what kind of incidents you have. I'm looking for transparency.
That is the main reason that we're here today. We cannot do this work without being in concert with the community. We would love an accountability system. We would love an opportunity for us to engage monthly to update the community on what's going on. We would love to transition a lot of the resistance to supporters. We can't tackle homelessness by ourselves. We're not, and so what we need is the community support. We would definitely be interested in that.
And my last question, in your proposal, you talked about using local small businesses. How do you see that working, and what types of businesses will you be pursuing?
Well, so we've started with, for example, the security service that we just hired. And so, and the reason why we're able to do that is we're able to leverage government funds to support the community around us. We have a construction company called Power Construction, which will also have subcontractors that we would want to come out of the local area. I have hopes and dreams of leveraging the Gurney Garden Center as our main landscape supplier. I think that would be a great opportunity for us. And any way that we can incorporate community businesses, and that's what's also most times difficult to do. We're doing that now in Waukegan.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you. This whole process gives us a chance to hear your vision. What we in this community utilize are a couple of tools like our zoning code, our zoning ordinance, and comprehensive plan is our community vision and our guide that we use. And respectfully, the testimony tonight was suggested that it's what we have is out of date, and we could debate that yes or no, but in the middle of that, there is some substance to it that is timeless as far as I'm concerned. And the East Grand area was identified a long time ago as a sensitive part of our community that had needs, okay, above and beyond a lot of the other part of Gurnee. And so as it relates to topics such as, reinforcing economic viability and characteristic of the area and, maintaining appropriate economic development, in the experience you have with these other locations and saying, trying to bring the business community involved, maybe I'm missing something here, but I could see what's happened from a aesthetic standpoint. We got some fencing, we've got some gardens, we've got a different traffic pattern and that sort of thing, and we appreciate that, and that was built in by design. But I'm not convinced of the economic development side of it, okay, and how this benefits that part of the community that's been identified as sensitive. And so how does that happen? Because I feel like I'm missing that.
Yeah, and so for us, we would want to work in concert with the corridor. One thing that I understand from reading some of the comprehensive plans is that historically, the rents here, and I'll let our subject matter expert George talk after this, but historically, the rents in that area have been low. And as such, it's really difficult to reinvest into the properties to make them more aesthetically pleasing. What you usually find in situations like this is nonprofits are able to access new components, build new programs, and require new space to hold those programs. So for example, when DuPage Pads moved into the Red Roof Inn in Downers Grove, they had to access an entirely new office building right next door and rent that out. It was empty space that the landlord was losing money over, and they were able to rent those spaces out and expand their program. PADS' program is expanding rapidly. We've added a $400,000 prevention program, so those individuals that are struggling with rent, we can provide those services. And we're currently adding $500,000, $500,000 into the Grandin Lewis area as we speak. And that includes a $40,000 fence to respond to some of the neighbors' complaints about unsheltered individuals in the parking lots that we have. And so some of the challenges that they have, we have those same challenges, and the benefit to having a nonprofit sector which generates $2 trillion a year, the benefit to having something like that come to your community is that that money gets pumped back into the ecosystem. We can't hold on to that. And so our job is to continue to improve the outcomes of the community. Lastly, the program in itself, if we think about what it means for us to transition an individual from unhoused, unsheltered,
Excuse me, Alan, I think you need to get closer to the microphone.
I'm sorry, I moved away, huh? To transition an individual from unhoused, unsheltered, unemployed, to gainful employment, to higher salaries, that is in itself also an economic improvement to the area. And so we are interested, and we do have, suggestions. We just don't think it's our place as the petitioner to suggest what East Grand could look like, but we are a community partner. And so we would want to come to the table and say, what would it look like for us to improve this area, and how can we leverage this as an opportunity to do that?
Thank you.
My question is more directed to staff in terms of public safety, building codes and all that stuff. Is the site plan as presented to us okay in all those regards?
Yes, there's a definite benefit to moving the driveway access onto Grand Avenue. That's part of our several of the last couple plans. There's definitely a traffic benefit to that. The landscaping, we've taken a good close look at that. It's a nice enhancement to the area. The parking area is will remain safe. The existing access is more than adequate to support the facility itself. The building itself, acts like a 1985 construction hotel building. It's dated. It doesn't meet current codes. With the renovations, they would have to bring several things up to code. But as it is, it would be an improvement over where it is right now.